接下来呢，我们要进行本论坛的1v1高峰对话。那么在数字化转型变革的进程当中啊 ，CDO 这个角色就经常被提及。那 CDO 这个角色是在数字化进程中怎样发挥作用的呢？我们有请下面的2位嘉宾。来自赛诺菲 CDO Ted Lai 和白金资产亚太区 CIO Eric Wang 给我们带来针对在企业数字化过程中 CDO 的角色定位和领导力的话题进行探讨。有请2位。
Maybe I say first, okay? Because we have a hot stop at 4 p.m. So I think I tried to do it in a very efficient way. 大家好，我叫 Eric Wang， 我来自一家private equity firm 叫 Platinum Equity。之前我在 Nike 也做了很多 digital transformation 的工作。今天我们主要的主角其实是 Ted， 所以有请 Ted 介绍一下自己。
大家好，我是我先用一点中文，但是可能快一点的话就用英文 ，right？ 我是赛诺菲的中国的CDO， 我是负责全公司的数字转型，从策略到怎么直销，到创新，到数字这个数据库所有的还有文化转型所以这个是一个蛮大的范围。之前的话，我是在汇丰银行当中国的数字的零售部门的数字头，还有数字转型的头，还有在亚太地区的partnership 的头。之前的话也有做很多创业公司，在digital 的行业。那过去的话也是一个这个媒体公司的像BBC 的亚太总裁，还有华纳兄弟的电视部门的亚太总裁。那个时候也是有数字化转型，因为当然媒体是第一个行业被数字影响了。
Okay, so 我们就现在开始，好吗？ Let's go ahead and get started. But before we do, I think both Ted and I feel quite inspired by what Louis just presented to us. It's really great experience about being a digital officer and what it's supposed to be. And what we're now talking and interviewing Ted is exactly what his role in the industry and all the interesting things that he's actually experiencing right now. So maybe we're starting with the first question. Ted, you can give us a kind of introduction about your roles as a CDO and also how it might be different from a CIO and CTO, right? Because people oftentimes get it confused.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And interestingly enough, as I was listening to Louis's talk, I realized that we have a very similar role, right? Except for the fact that right now in Sanofi, for instance, IT, it only reports to the CDO on a global level, not yet locally, right? They're still parallel. So CDO role inside Sanofi is, like I said before, we align to the corporate strategy, right? It's a bit about business transformation, leveraging digital tools, but also, within there's go-to-market transformation. How do we transform the sales force operations leveraging technologies, right? How do we innovate, create partnerships with startups, but also big tech companies to create whole new businesses? And finally, even basic things like how do we design a data lake and how do we govern that? And finally, the pieces around culture. How do we change the organization to work agile at scale so that we can actually move fast? We can deliver in pieces as opposed to one giant waterfall project. Whereas the CIO, CTO groups are primarily responsible for taking that vision and prioritization and delivering that from a build standpoint, right? So that's actually how, interesting enough, that's how when we were at a bank, that's how it was organized as well, right? So the digital groups primarily are responsible for understanding the user experience, the strategy, the user experience, the journeys, the design of it, and then the IT teams would actually build.
And I think in echo to what Ted said, right? I mean, just my personal opinion, right? I think what Louis just showed about organization structure sounds a little bit more makes sense, right? Because IT is really, let's say, pure IT technical stuff. It's really a strong force to enable that. I think if it can be integrated into the same team, like your global organization did, it will further beneficial the whole organization, definitely.
That's right. So interesting enough, as I reflect on that, right? So yes, you can have hardline reporting, or you can just have project teams that are cross-functional, right? So within the project team, you have a product manager or product owner, depending on how you call it, that defines the product strategy, the user experience, and so forth, and they prioritize the features. And then you have the user experience teams, right? Then you have the project managers that work in an agile way. Then you have, I'm simplifying it, the tech leads and the coders and the people who test it. Hopefully it's all one giant cross-functional team that's co-located, focused on the same features, and always talking, right? In that scenario, you actually don't even need the hardline reporting as long as the project lead has the ability to set the KPIs and to measure against that.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, as long as they work as a team, it doesn't matter too much about the reporting line, right? Okay, so let's go to maybe next question. I think many people would be interesting with tech's background. You said about media, you said about banking, and you said about actually entrepreneurship, that where you actually invented companies previously, and now you're at Sanofi as CDO. How do you actually transfer from different industry? What is your experience, of that?
So, it's very interesting. They always say you connect the dots going backwards, right? I did not start off trying to become a digital transformation expert, shall we say, right? There was no such role 20 years ago. But instead, I just went from the earliest industry to be transformed was media, right? That's where I was to start my career. And then I moved industry after industry. I got mostly headhunted by the next one, or an opportunity came along and I said, this will be an interesting thing to apply the skills that I learned in the previous industry. But ultimately, there's a lot of commonality, right? A lot of it, even 20 years ago, it was about how do you implement the right technologies to drive, the change, understanding the strategy, applying the technologies, but also driving culture change. Now, of course, so many more industries and companies are going through the same process now that it's almost becoming a big practice for a lot of consulting firms, as well as, there's a whole army of CDOs now in the world, right? But, as I go from industry into industry, it is about applying those ways, the framework, but also being, truly empathetic and listening to the new stakeholders and trying to understand what their needs are in order to apply that framework, right? It's not just about one rule, one framework that just goes across everything in a very rigid way. You have to be somewhat flexible enough based on the new situation.
And totally agree with that. And I think, despite the title, right, I do agree. Like even go back 5, 10, 20 years. The core values is actually very, very much common, right? You hear the consumers, you hear the customers, and you try to solve their pain points. And by trying to solve their points, you try to use the right level of technology. You try to have the right level of team to make sure it happens, right? I think it's constantly the core value. And I know that Sanofi is actually very similar to Thermo Fisher. It's a very old. I wouldn't probably say old, less historical, traditional company for a long time. I mean, what kind of key challenges that you're facing or you're feeling, to be a CDO for this kind of traditional company?
So, a lot of conversations in these traditional companies, and I can name lots and lots of traditional companies I've been at, we've been doing this. I'm an expert at this you don't know anything. Why do you think you can make the change, right? So you know, usually I'm the only one that's coming from outside of the industry, right? I was like that in banking. I was like that in media. I was like that in auto e-commerce, right? Like we were surrounded by old line car dealers, and of course now in pharma, you know, almost everybody else was within the industry. Of course, they know their industry really well. So it's really hard to persuade them to make the change, right? So you have to start by demonstrating a quick win, right? Showing that if you work together with me, I can help you improve your bottom line. And then they, you know, because people in pharma are very scientific and data-driven, that's the important piece to get them on board, right? They want to see the evidence. It was the same in banking, by the way. A lot of very data-driven analytical people, they also said the same thing, right? They're like, we've been doing the same thing for the last 50 years, right? What makes you think we need to change? Of course, you know, in China, the good news is that as consumers, everybody sees, especially in banking, everybody saw the rise of Alipay and WeChat Pay, and then they were thinking, oh, gee, maybe we should change. But then they have no idea how. So this is why I was able to point to those and say, okay, how do we get closer to that user experience, right? In pharma now, we're all, in healthcare in general, we're just making it up as we go along. I think we're still early days in the digital transformation of this industry. You have even more, lots and lots of other stakeholders besides the instrument players, the pharmaceutical companies. You have hospitals, you have the doctors, you have the regulators, you have, all, of course, the patients. You know, lots of different people have had, and the insurance companies and the payers, they've been entrenched. And so, you know, it's actually even more complex. It's not just about how do we change ourselves, it's about how do we help to make the change in the whole ecosystem, right? But again, let's start small. Let's create some quick wins, and maybe quick wins with partners. And eventually you get more and more companies on board, because ultimately that's what the whole industry needs, a digital end-to-end solution.
And I would totally agree with Tech, is even though we're coming from different industry, like I was more, I was into automotive, I was into retail, FMCG. I think, you know, typically conversation like people say, I'm an expert, I know everything, you know nothing. You know, I often say to, hey, okay, I admire that, I respect that, but did you ever solve the problem? Right, I mean, these are the critical thinkings that oftentimes the conversation has, right? I remember when I was in Nike, we had a really great slogan, consumer decides. So no matter which experts you are, we often ask question, whatever we do, did we ever solve the consumer's issues? Is it really consumer driven? I think that's really what Ted is talking about, right? Shifting the culture. How can you shifting the culture? I think you need to embrace certain kind of conversation like that, so people can start thinking of it, right? And I think maybe in addition to the next question would be, say, now you're in Sanofi, now you're working for pharma. How do you think that is, you know, this kind of digitalization? What is the status so far? How you feel that is in the pharma industry? How is going in the line, and what kind of technology that you think, you know, would be considered to enable the transformation?
Yeah, so I think we're still at very early stages of the digital transformation journey. I'm specifically talking about pharma now, right? So I think in China, you know, when I first got to pharma only 9 months ago, I realized that, you know, amazingly, we had armies and armies of salespeople doing face-to-face calls with doctors, right? Of course, you know, even back then, we started putting together plans to figure out how to make that much more efficient, right? Of course, with I Ching, right? Everybody suddenly could not go see doctors, and it really started accelerating the transformation of how do you manage your sales force if they can't physically go, right? So how do you give them the digital tools? not only them the digital tools, but how do you create this engine underneath that gives them the right things to say at the right times. And of course, you also can go around the salespeople and actually send digital messages directly to doctors, right? So these are things that are pretty intuitive for people from other industries, but amazingly, there was a lot of entrenched behavior and culture that enabled the industry to continue on, right? But again, now, I think you're going to see lots and lots of changes coming, partly because of the reality of the virus situation, but also the government's pushing for change. There's a lot of dynamics in the industry that's going to force the change. Plus, of course, the patients are demanding better service as well and not having to go to the hospitals. So the entire delivery of healthcare will change. So I think it's a very, very fascinating time to be in the healthcare sector. You're going to see major changes coming in the next 3 to 5 years. Of course, in even incremental steps, you're going to start seeing the change.
Right, and I want to maybe selectively quote what Ted just said about, right, about because of the COVID-19 situation, people are not able to physically meet or, talk with the doctor. Instead, they can send, like a WeChat message, etc. This is typically, I would think, like China digital ecosystem, right? I don't know, but like based on my experience with Europe and US, might be regulatory doesn't allow you to do that, or the doctor itself that they feel like there's some kind of threat to their privacy, etc. They will refuse for you to do that. But in China, everybody is so get into the WeChat ecosystem. I mean, it won't harm if you receive a doctor receive a message from a salesperson, right? So maybe Ted, can we talk a little bit about how, let's say, the Chinese ecosystem of digital, what do you see that it will influence, let's say, the pharma industry here, or even further influence the global market of the industry? Let's say, more innovative ideas that could be embraced by the global.
Yeah, I think China has a great opportunity to become a global leader in digital healthcare, right? Digital healthcare meaning the whole ecosystem of healthcare delivery, because there's significant government input, government push now. There's a massive base of funding from both venture capital, government funds, and other sources. Plus, of course, you have the really developed tech giants who have, if you look at what they're doing in healthcare, they have plays across the entire value chain now. All they need to do is start stringing it together better, and suddenly, unless people work with them, we're going to be potentially the big profit pools will be sucked by them. And of course, you have an interesting situation where most of the population in China is actually much more comfortable with less concerned about data privacy, right? As long as you get benefits for it. People are, as opposed to in Europe and other places where people are protesting against people monitoring them. So with that, of course, with the data access and with the massive digital population, you also have the rise of AI and the ability to train the AI much more quickly. So I think all these things will end up creating a really, really interesting and developed end-to-end digital solution for healthcare delivery that ultimately will be studied and maybe copied in part to other parts of the world. I think China will be one of probably the first. Oh, and I should mention 5G rollout, right? That's clearly one of the big hot buttons right now. With 5G, you enable Internet of Things, wearables, right? All this is even more data that will, change healthcare forever. So I think, and given that China's first in terms of scaled 5G rollout, again, it will yield huge benefits to the development of digital healthcare.
And totally agree with that. And I think it just reminds me in my mind that if we're looking at this kind of like China-led digital innovation where it can influence global, I just recall an exact case. Let's say, China, we use barcode, right, for the health. Right, like every city, every state that people has those, 健康码, right? And then, we see this getting rolled out to Singapore, or right, at least they refer to what China did. And now we see like Apple and Google, they did a similar thing for US. This is so typical reference case that how China digital innovations can really lead the world in sharing to the global, right? With that in mind, I think clock is ticking. We are almost close to this one-on-one interview and conversation. I would like to leave 5 minutes for people. You can raise your hand, see if you have any questions to Ted. So 给大家5分钟时间，大家有没有一些问题想要问我们圣诺菲的 CDO Ted? Before we close this interview. 在我们结束这个面试或者结束这个会谈之前，有没有一些问题想问？
You mean what kind of
what kind of roles and what kind of candidate backgrounds are there in your current team?
Right. So that's a good question. So under me, first we have our innovation hub, right? Within there we have, product manager, product owner types. We have a tech lead who actually looks at almost like a solutions architect. We have UI UX people. We have commercialization people who write the business plan for some of our innovations, right? We have project managers. We have an agile coach, right? So it's a cross-functional team in there. We actually scale that by having multiple pods so that we can handle multiple projects at the same time. Then I have my go-to-market team, right? The multi-channel engagement team. And so in there we have people with strong digital marketing experience from other industries. We have product owners as well, because they need to work on the, so say the Salesforce
product roadmap.
Product roadmap and priorities, right? The tools for that. And then of course we have project managers and also, people who manage the content. We're creating lots of interesting digital content, right? So we have a whole factory that we're building up. So there's a lot of different people underneath. I also have a strategist, and he also handles, helping me figure out how to align the digital strategy to corporate strategy. He also happens to look at a lot of our projects and see if they fit into our digital strategy. If it doesn't, then we should deprioritize. I also have another senior architect, somebody who looks at the entire IT development plan and help them figure out, does it fit under the same architecture? Right. Amazingly, we didn't actually have that in the past, so we created that role.
What is data team? Can you?
How about data team?
So our data and analytics had dual reports. Okay, so we have in pharma. There's a basically how do we manage the sales force more efficiently? There's a lot of data regarding Salesforce, right? And so he also focuses on that, while he's also helping me build the data lake and building the AI analytics capabilities for the next generation. So we work very closely.
2 minutes.
Thank you for both of your great sharing, and I really learned a lot from you. And I'm currently in charge of strategic partnership in Oslo, China, and in digital department. So I have 2 questions, if I can ask. So first one is, from some report we can see that ecosystem collaboration is very important in digital transformation, especially in China. We have so much tech giant. So I know Sanofi has some very successful collaboration with, for example, like Ping An, and but I can see that, for example, technology giant, they will be our future competitors, maybe, because, for example, in terms of data and in terms of intellectual property, and how will you deal with the relationship with this kind of partners? And another question is and how you make sure how you build a mechanism to make sure the digital strategy align with corporate strategy as well as global corporate strategy.
So let me take on the first question. Actually, I forgot to mention we have a small team that handles digital partnerships under Innovation Hub. We work with our corporate BD group, and together, we create the reasons for the partnership, the journeys, and the strategy and journeys, and they execute the deals, right? So that's how it works together. But ultimately, absolutely, we have to work with the wider ecosystem, right? Healthcare is so broad, and there are so many pieces to it that we cannot do everything ourselves. We know where we can add value, where we still bring a lot of value, and we're going to leverage that to get to help build that 1 + 1 = 3 solution, right? With tech giants or with startups or both, right? Yes, there's always a concern that the tech giants run ahead and eventually squeeze traditional players out. The good news is that we're aware of that, but we are clearly focused on how do we work with them, right? We absolutely can bring value, and they recognize that. That's where the future holds. They don't want to get involved in dealing with regulators and all that, right? And they don't have the doctor relationships. They don't have the medical knowledge yet, right? And maybe they will never, right? They might make a decision. This is not an area we want to play. So if we understand that, how do we work together to go to the future? In terms of aligning the corporate strategy, so I'm constantly talking to the global strategists, right? Not only the global corporate strategy, but also the global digital strategy people to make sure we're aligned. And I report also to our country CEO, who sets the country priorities. And he and I talk constantly. And we make sure that what we're doing digitally and IT-wise enables his goals. And it also happens to be his #1 priority to digitally transform the company.
Yeah, and a little add upon that, I think ultimately we all come back to the origin. What kind of problem do we solve? What kind of value do we bring? No matter you're a digital team, your IT team, your marketing team, your sales team, every people need to answer this ultimate question. Then you can bring into alignment. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I think that that closed the interview. Really appreciate Ted's time. I think we made the hard stop possible. And thank you everyone for listening. Thank you.
好的，谢谢两位。一开始听到 CDO 这个角色名词啊，我也是比较好奇的。那么今天通过 TED 的解释，我相信还是得到了很多不同的这个启发，很好的启发。我相信你们也都是